Maxine Waters strode into the Senate Banking Committee hearing room, her heels clicking with the authority of a woman who had ruled Washington's financial policy for 34 years. Tulsi Gabbard, the principled senator from Hawaii, sat quietly in the corner, her calm demeanor masking the storm she was about to unleash. Waters adjusted her microphone, her eyes gleaming with the confidence of someone who had never lost a banking debate. Someone who had stared down Treasury secretaries and Fortune 500 CEOs without flinching. This was her arena, her victory lap, a chance to cement her legacy as the unchallenged queen of financial regulation. She had requested this hearing to crush Republican opposition to her latest regulatory push. And today, she had her sights set on a new target: Tulsi Gabbard, a senator she dismissed as an idealist with no real grasp of Washington's gritty realities. Waters leaned forward, her posture radiating dominance, her voice carrying the weight of decades of political warfare. She had no idea that the woman across from her had spent weeks preparing a devastating ambush. Armed not with political bluster, but with a deep understanding of constitutional principles and a folder full of irrefutable evidence. The room buzzed with anticipation, cameras rolling on every major network, reporters scribbling notes, and staffers whispering as they sensed the electricity in the air. This was no ordinary hearing. It was a showdown, and Waters was ready to deliver the opening blow. The Congresswoman's lips curled into a faint, predatory smile as she scanned the room, her gaze landing on Gabbard, who sat with a small, worn copy of the U.S. Constitution resting on the table before her. Waters had seen her type before: young, earnest, full of ideals, but lacking the scars of Washington's political trenches. She adjusted her glasses, her movements deliberate, signaling to the room that she was about to assert her dominance. "Senator Gabbard," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm genuinely curious what qualifies a senator from Hawaii with no significant background in financial regulation to lecture this committee on banking policy. Did your time in the military teach you about complex financial systems, or were you too busy chasing abstract ideals to learn how the real world works?" The room stirred uncomfortably. It was a calculated strike designed to put Gabbard on the defensive, to paint her as an outsider in over her head. Democratic committee members nodded approvingly, their faces reflecting the satisfaction of watching their champion draw first blood. Waters had a reputation for eviscerating opponents with surgical precision. And this opening salvo was classic Maxine sharp, personal, and delivered with the authority of someone who had dominated Washington for longer than Gabbard had been in politics. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion, every shift in posture as the audience at home leaned closer to their screens. But Tulsi Gabbard didn't flinch. If anything, her expression grew calmer, her eyes steady as she reached for her copy of the Constitution, her fingers brushing the worn cover with quiet reverence. She had anticipated this attack, had prepared for it, and now she was ready to turn the tables. "Congresswoman Waters," she said, her voice clear and measured, carrying the quiet strength of someone who had faced far greater challenges than a verbal sparring match. "That's an interesting question. But let me ask you something in return. Asterisk, what specific constitutional authority grants Congress the power to regulate American banking in the way you've advocated for decades?" The question landed like a grenade in the center of the room, its simplicity masking its devastating potential. Waters' confident smirk faltered for a split second, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face that every camera caught. This wasn't the response she had expected. Republicans typically stumbled when she challenged their credentials, retreating into vague defenses or flustered explanations. But Gabbard wasn't retreating, she was advancing, her voice steady. Her argument rooted in the founding document that Waters had sworn to uphold 18 times over her career. The silence in the room was palpable, the air thick with tension as Waters straightened in her chair, clearly irritated by the unexpected pushback. Her voice took on a sharper edge, the prosecutorial tone that had made her a legend in Democratic circles. "Senator, don't lecture me about constitutional authority," she snapped, her words cutting through the room like a blade. "I've been defending the Constitution and American families for 34 years, while you've been windsurfing in Hawaii and playing soldier. This committee deals with real-world economics, not classroom theories." The jab was meant to sting, to remind everyone of Gabbard's relative youth and unconventional path to the Senate. Democratic staffers exchanged knowing glances, confident that their champion had regained control. But Gabbard's smile never wavered. If anything, it grew warmer, more assured. As she opened her Constitution to a specific page with the ease of someone who had studied it thoroughly. "Congresswoman," she replied, her tone calm but unyielding, "I'm not here to play games. I'm reading from Article 1, Section 8, which lists the 18 specific powers granted to Congress by the Constitution. Banking regulation isn't explicitly listed among them. So under what constitutional theory do you justify the existence of agencies like the CFPB, which wield unchecked power to write rules that bind Americans without direct congressional oversight?" The room went utterly silent, the weight of Gabbard's questions settling over the committee like a storm cloud. This wasn't the softball exchange Waters had anticipated. Gabbard was asking fundamental questions about the constitutional limits of federal power. Questions that went to the heart of Waters' entire career. For decades, Waters had built her legacy on expanding government regulation, assuming her authority was unquestionable, never having to defend it against someone who understood the Constitution at a foundational level. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of panic beneath her polished exterior, as she realized she was facing an opponent unlike any she had encountered before. "The Commerce Clause," she said, her voice firm but less confident than before, "clearly gives Congress the authority to regulate financial institutions. That's basic constitutional law." Senator Gabbard nodded, her expression patient, almost professorial, as if addressing a student who had missed a critical lesson. "The Commerce Clause allows Congress to regulate interstate commerce." "Yes," she said, her voice steady and deliberate. "But does that include creating unaccountable bureaucracies that write binding rules without explicit congressional authorization? Because that sounds less like regulating commerce and more like abdicating legislative responsibility." She flipped to another page in her Constitution, her movements precise and practiced. Asterisk James Madison wrote in Federalist 45 that the powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Where exactly does the Constitution define Congress's power to create agencies that act as lawmakers without accountability to the people? Waters felt the ground shifting beneath her. The room once her domain, now feeling like a courtroom where she was the one on trial. Gabbard's questions weren't just rhetorical. They were a direct challenge to the foundation of Waters' authority, exposing a gap in her understanding that she had never been forced to confront. The cameras captured every moment, the tightening of Waters' jaw, the slight tremble in her hands, the way her eyes darted to her staffers for support. Democratic senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that their champion was losing her grip. Gabbard, meanwhile, remained composed, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced adversity and emerged stronger. "Congresswoman," she continued, her tone respectful but unrelenting, "the Constitution isn't a suggestion. It's the supreme law of the land, and every member of this body swears an oath to uphold it. If we can't justify our actions with specific constitutional authority, then we're not governing, we're ruling." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable, a reminder to everyone in the room that this was no ordinary debate. This was a reckoning. Waters tried to regain her footing, her voice rising with the indignation that had carried her through countless political battles. "Senator Gabbard, I've spent my career fighting for working families, protecting them from predatory banks and corporate greed. What have you done? You talk about the Constitution, but where were you when families were losing their homes in the financial crisis? It was a desperate pivot, an attempt to shift the conversation from constitutional principles to emotional rhetoric, where Waters felt more comfortable. But Gabbard was ready. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking with Waters in a way that made the older woman flinch. "Congresswoman Gabbard said," her voice steady but infused with moral clarity, "fighting for families is noble. But the Constitution doesn't grant Congress unlimited power to do whatever we think is good. It grants specific enumerated powers, and we're accountable to those limits. The question isn't whether your intentions are good. It's whether your actions comply with the document you swore to defend." She paused, letting her words sink in, her gaze never wavering. "And if we're talking about protecting families, let's discuss how your family benefited from your position. Would you like to start with One United Bank?" The mention of One United Bank was like a thunderclap in the room. Waters' face went pale, her confident posture crumbling as if she'd been struck. Every reporter in the room knew the name, knew the scandal, knew the implications. Democratic staffers froze, their eyes wide with panic, while Republican senators leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Gabbard's folder, unassuming but brimming with evidence, sat on the table like a loaded weapon. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't resorted to personal attacks. But her words carried the weight of truth, backed by weeks of meticulous preparation. Waters gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening as she realized the trap she had walked into. Gabbard wasn't just defending herself. She was about to dismantle Waters' entire legacy, piece by piece on live television. The room was electric with tension, the cameras capturing every second of Waters' unraveling composure. This wasn't the victory lap she had planned. This was the beginning of a battle she was unprepared to fight against an opponent who wielded the Constitution like a sword and the truth like a shield. The ambush had begun, and Maxine Waters was about to learn that no amount of political experience could withstand the power of principle and preparation. The name One United Bank hung in the air like a death knell, but Tulsi Gabbard paused for a moment, letting the tension build before diving deeper into the constitutional fray that had already shaken Waters to her core. She had opened the door with her questions on Article 1, Section 8, and now she was ready to walk through it, exposing the cracks in Waters' foundation of power. Gabbard leaned back slightly, her voice steady and resonant, carrying the calm assurance of someone who had studied the Constitution not as a political prop, but as the bedrock of American governance. "Congresswoman, before we discuss specific instances like One United, let's ensure we're clear on the constitutional principles at stake here," she said, her tone inviting yet unyielding, like a teacher guiding a wayward pupil back to the fundamentals. Waters, still reeling from the initial shock, tried to interject, her voice rising with a mix of defiance and desperation. "Senator, you're twisting this into some academic exercise. I've been in the trenches fighting for economic justice, while you've been wherever you've been. The Constitution evolves with the times. It's a living document." It was a classic deflection, one Waters had used successfully for years, but Gabbard wasn't buying it. Her eyes sharpened as she flipped another page in her pocket Constitution, the small booklet that had become her trademark in Senate debates, a symbol of her unwavering commitment to principled leadership. "Congresswoman, that's an intriguing interpretation," Gabbard replied, her words measured and precise, each one landing with the weight of historical precedent. "But if the Constitution is so malleable that it means whatever we want it to mean in the moment, then it ceases to limit government power at all. You're essentially arguing that the very document we both swore to uphold is irrelevant when it conflicts with our policy goals." The room grew even quieter. If that was possible, as Gabbard's logic sliced through the air like a well-honed blade. She continued, her voice gaining a rhythmic cadence that drew everyone in. from wide-eyed staffers to seasoned reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks. The founders anticipated this exact temptation, which is why they included the 10th Amendment, explicitly reserving powers not delegated to the federal government, to the states, or the people. They knew politicians would always seek to expand their authority beyond what's granted, especially when cloaked in good intentions. Waters shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her usual commanding presence diminished, her hands fidgeting with a pen as if searching for something solid to grasp. This wasn't how hearings went for her. She was the one who asked the tough questions, the one who left opponents stammering. But here was Gabbard methodically dismantling her worldview with quotes from Madison and references to the Federalist Papers, turning what should have been a routine regulatory debate into a profound examination of governmental overreach. Gabbard pressed on, her preparation evident in every detail, her folder brimming with annotated documents that she referenced with effortless familiarity. "Let's look at the Commerce Clause more closely, since you mentioned it," she said. Her tone, patient but probing, like a prosecutor building an airtight case. The clause empowers Congress to regulate commerce among the states, but the Supreme Court has repeatedly clarified that this doesn't mean unlimited authority to control every aspect of economic life. In cases like United States v. Lopez, the court struck down laws that stretched the clause too far, reminding us that federal power has boundaries. Waters's face flushed, a rare sign of vulnerability from the veteran politician, as Gabbard cited precedent with the precision of a constitutional scholar. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Gabbard continued, her Hawaiian-inflected voice adding a layer of earnest sincerity. "Your approach to banking regulation creating agencies like the CFPB that operate with minimal congressional oversight smacks of the very legislative abdication the founders warned against. Where in the Constitution do you find the authority to delegate lawmaking power to unelected bureaucrats?" The question echoed through the chamber, a direct challenge that left Waters scrambling for a response. She straightened her posture, trying to reclaim her authority, her voice taking on a defensive sharpness. "Senator, the financial crisis demanded action. We had to adapt. The founders couldn't have foreseen modern banking complexities like derivatives and global markets. But Gabbard was ready for that too. Her response swift and merciless in its logic. "Congresswoman, the founders designed the Constitution to be timeless precisely because they understood human nature and the dangers of unchecked power," she countered, her eyes locking onto Waters with unblinking intensity. They lived through economic turmoil themselves. The Articles of Confederation's failures taught them that centralized power must be limited. If every new challenge justifies expanding federal authority without amendment, then we've abandoned the Republican form of government they envisioned. The Democratic side of the committee fidgeted, their nods less enthusiastic now, as Gabbard's arguments resonated even among those who disagreed with her politically. She wasn't shouting or grandstanding. She was educating, her words weaving a tapestry of historical insight and legal acumen that made Waters's positions seem not just debatable, but constitutionally suspect. Reporters in the gallery exchanged glances, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary, a senator using the Constitution not as a shield, but as a sword, cutting through decades of accumulated precedent with fresh, principled vigor. Waters, sensing the tide turning, lashed out with renewed fury, her voice booming through the microphones. "This is ridiculous. I've chaired this committee through crises that would make your head spin. You come in here with your pocket constitution and think you can school me. I've protected consumers from Wall Street predators while your party cozies up to big banks." It was a pivot to partisanship, a familiar terrain where Waters excelled. But Gabbard didn't take the bait. Instead, she smiled faintly, a gesture that only heightened the tension and delved deeper into her arsenal. "Congresswoman, partisanship won't resolve this," she said calmly. Her composure, a stark contrast to Waters' escalating agitation. Let's examine the necessary and proper clause which you might invoke next. It allows Congress to make laws necessary for executing its enumerated powers. But, as Chief Justice Marshall noted in McCulloch v. Maryland, it doesn't grant a blank check. Pointed out that the CFPB's structure insulated from presidential removal and funded outside the appropriations process raised serious separation of powers concerns. As recent Supreme Court rulings had affirmed, Gabbard's citations were spontaneous, her knowledge drawing from years of independent study and a commitment to integrity that transcended party lines. The exchange intensified as she methodically addressed each of Waters' defenses, turning them back on her with constitutional mirrors that reflected the flaws in her logic. If Congress can create any agency it deems necessary without clear limits, then what's to stop us from overstepping into state domains? Gabbard asked, her voice rising slightly for emphasis, the first hint of passion breaking through her calm facade. Waters stammered a response, falling back on progressive talking points about adapting to modern needs. But it rang hollow against Gabbard's unassailable framework. The room watched in rapt silence as Gabbard's arguments, built like a symphony, reaching their crescendo. The genius of our system is its checks and balances, designed to prevent the concentration of power that leads to tyranny. Your regulatory empire, built on vague interpretations, undermines that balance. Waters' staffers whispered urgently behind her, their faces pale, realizing their boss was outmatched, not by rhetoric, but by substance. Gabbard, with her quiet determination and profound respect for the founding principles, was exposing the emperor's new clothes, one clause at a time. As this chapter of constitutional mastery unfolded, Waters' frustration boiled over. Enough with the lectures. I've dedicated my life to equality and justice. What gives you the right to question my commitment? But Gabbard, undeterred, responded with devastating poise. Congresswoman, it's not about questioning your commitment. It's about ensuring that commitment aligns with our oath to the Constitution. Good intentions don't justify exceeding its bounds. The back and forth revealed Gabbard's strategic brilliance. She had anticipated every move, her preparation turning potential vulnerabilities into strengths. Waters, for the first time in years, looked truly cornered, her empire of influence cracking under the relentless pressure of truth and principle. The hearing meant to be her showcase was becoming Gabbard's platform, a demonstration that integrity and knowledge could topple even the mightiest political fortresses. And as Gabbard closed this phase of her assault, hinting at the personal scandals to come, the room braced for the next explosion, knowing that Waters' unraveling was far from over. Chapter 3. Unveiling the Truth, with the constitutional groundwork laid bare and the shaky foundations of Waters' regulatory empire exposed. Tulsi Gabbard shifted gears seamlessly, her calm demeanor now infused with the precision of a seasoned investigator, ready to reveal the personal stakes long whispered through Washington's corridors. The mention of One United Bank in her previous exchange had been a teaser, a strategic hook that now pulled the entire room into the depths of a scandal Waters had hoped was buried in ethics reports and forgotten. Headlines ** Gabbard opened her manila folder with deliberate slowness, the rustle of papers amplifying in the hushed chamber. Her eyes meeting Waters with a steady gaze that conveyed not anger but unyielding resolve. Congresswoman, since you've emphasized your dedication to fighting corporate greed and protecting families, let's examine how that aligns with your actions regarding One United Bank, she said. Her voice clear and resonant, carrying the moral weight of someone committed to transparency above all. Waters' reaction was immediate, a visible paling of her complexion, her hands clenching the table's edge as if to steady herself against the incoming storm. The name alone evoked memories of investigations and scrutiny. And now, in this live televised arena, It was being resurrected by an opponent who wielded facts like weapons forged in the fires of accountability. Gabbard pulled out the first document, a copy of an ethics committee report, holding it up slightly for the cameras to capture its official seal. Her movements methodical, almost theatrical in their precision. For those watching who may not recall, in the midst of the financial crisis, you personally arranged a meeting between Treasury Department officials and representatives from One United Bank, a minority-owned institution, she explained, her tone factual yet probing, ensuring every word landed with clarity for the national audience. What wasn't disclosed at the time and what subsequent probes uncovered. Was that your husband, Sidney Williams, held $350,000 worth of stock in that very bank and had served on its board from 2004 to 2008. The revelation hung heavy. The room's silence broken only by the faint whir of cameras zooming in on Waters' frozen expression. She tried to interrupt, her voice cracking with urgency. That's old news, Senator. I was fully cleared by the House Ethics Committee after a thorough review. But Gabbard pressed forward, undeterred, her composure a shield against the deflection. Ma'am, with respect, let's review the facts as documented, she replied, her Hawaii roots lending a grounded authenticity to her delivery. She reached for a calculator from her materials, punching in numbers with swift efficiency, transforming abstract figures into tangible accusations. Following that meeting, you orchestrated that One United received $12 million in taxpayer bailout funds through the Troubled Asset Relief Program, Gabbard continued, her voice steady, each syllable underscoring the gravity of the conflict. Your family's investment was preserved. Your husband's stock avoided becoming worthless. This was an aid for all minority banks. It was targeted assistance after a meeting where One United was the sole focus, surprising even Treasury officials. Waters' staffers exchanged panicked glances, their whispers urgent but futile, as Gabbard laid out the timeline with irrefutable detail. Moreover, according to the ethics investigation, your chief of staff at the time, your grandson, Mikhail Moore, was actively involved in securing that federal help, Gabbard added, pulling another document and summarizing an email chain aloud. He sent messages highlighting One United's troubles, provided draft legislation, and maintained ongoing contact with bank executives, all while your family stood to lose hundreds of thousands if the bank failed. The mathematical breakdown followed. Gabbard's calculator clicks audible in the tension-filled room. That $350,000 stake represented between 4.6 and 15.2% of your family's net worth. As noted in the reports, if the bank collapsed, that investment vanished poof, gone, but thanks to the bailout you facilitated, it survived. Waters' composure cracked further, her voice rising to a near shout in defense. My grandson was just doing his job. I believed I was helping all minority-owned banks. I didn't know the meeting would zero in on One United. Gabbard's response was swift, her logic cutting like a scalpel through the excuses. Congresswoman, you arranged the meeting yourself. How could you not know its purpose? This suggests either deliberate concealment of your family's interests or negligence in managing conflicts, neither of which inspires confidence in someone lecturing others on financial ethics. The room erupted in subtle chaos, reporters typing furiously, committee members shifting uneasily, Democrats avoiding eye contact while Republicans nodded in quiet approval. Gabbard wasn't stopping. She delved deeper, her folder yielding more evidence like a bottomless well of accountability. But this isn't isolated, she said, her tone shifting to broader indictment. Los Angeles Times reporting documented how your relatives have profited over $1 million during your congressional tenure through businesses and candidates you've supported. Your daughter, Karen Waters, and son, Edward Waters, have repeatedly benefited from your political influence. The accusations piled on. each backed by public records and investigative journalism that Gabbard cited with pinpoint accuracy. This isn't about championing working families. It's about turning public service into a family enterprise. She stated, her voice infused with principled outrage, tempered by calm delivery. You've railed against corruption while arranging bailouts that directly safeguarded your family's finances. You've employed relatives in key positions where they could influence outcomes benefiting those same interests. Waters trembled visibly. A mix of rage and fear etching lines on her face, her attempts at rebuttal growing feebler. You're attacking my family. They've done nothing wrong, she protested. But Gabbard countered with devastating poise. I'm not attacking, Congresswoman. I'm reading from ethics reports, newspaper investigations, and public disclosures. The question is, why do you believe your family deserves to profit from your public role while you condemn others for similar conflicts? The destruction was methodical. Gabbard's preparation turning whispers of scandal into a roaring indictment. Her integrity shining as a beacon against Waters' crumbling facade. As the revelations cascaded, the hearing transformed into a spectacle of exposure. Gabbard's unyielding pursuit of truth captivating the nation. Asterisk, she highlighted how Waters had been named among the most corrupt politicians multiple times by watchdog groups. Ticking off the years 2005, 2006, 2009. 2011 with the authority of someone who valued facts over favoritism. This pattern wasn't coincidence. It was systematic enrichment through power, Gabbard asserted, her words resonating with moral clarity. Waters sat stunned, her empire of influence fracturing under the weight of documented evidence. The cameras capturing her speechless horror. Gabbard, with her commitment to service and disdain for hypocrisy, had not only defended herself but illuminated the dark corners of entrenched power. The room braced for Waters' final, desperate counter. Knowing Gabbard's arsenal was far from depleted. The path to full reckoning, paving the way for a profound lesson in accountability. As the revelations from Gabbard's folder sealed Waters' fate, the Congresswoman sat in stunned silence, her once imposing figure diminished. Her eyes glazed with the realization that her 34 years of accumulated power had crumbled under the relentless assault of truth and principle. Tulsi Gabbard, having laid bare the conflicts and hypocrisies, turned to the broader implications, her voice rising with a passionate yet controlled fervor that commanded the room's undivided attention. Congresswoman, this isn't about personal vendettas or partisan wins, she said, her tone shifting to solemn reflection. Her Hawaii-rooted sincerity shining through like a beacon in the storm of political turmoil. It's about restoring faith in our institutions by holding everyone accountable to the same standards. When public servants enrich themselves and their families through their positions, they betray the trust of the American people and undermine the very democracy we swore to protect. Waters made one final feeble attempt to deflect. Her voice barely above a whisper, invoking broader issues of inequality and justice. But it fell flat against the mountain of evidence Gabbard had presented. The committee chairman, sensing the inevitable conclusion, called for a recess, his gavel striking with a finality that echoed the end of an era. As the cameras panned out, capturing Waters' defeated posture and Gabbard's poised resolve, the nation watched a pivotal moment unfold. A reminder that integrity could indeed triumph over entrenched influence. In the immediate aftermath, the hearing room erupted into controlled pandemonium. Reporters surging forward with questions, their phones buzzing with incoming alerts as social media ignited with the story. Gabbard's performance became an instant viral sensation. Clips of her constitutional dissections and scandal exposures spreading like wildfire across platforms. Hashtags like #Gabbard exposes and #constitutional integrity trending nationwide. Conservative outlets hailed her as a principled warrior, while even some progressive voices acknowledged the undeniable force of her arguments, though reluctantly. Democratic leaders scrambled in damage control. issuing statements that supported Waters' legacy while sidestepping the specifics of her unraveling. Their offices flooded with calls from constituents demanding explanations. Waters' staff huddled around her, their faces etched with resignation, knowing that her effectiveness as a leader was irreparably damaged. How could she champion financial ethics when her own conflicts had been so thoroughly documented? Gabbard, meanwhile, exited the room with quiet dignity, her team fielding a barrage of interview requests from networks eager to capture her insights. Her office phones rang off the hook with speaking invitations from think tanks, universities, and civic groups, all drawn to her demonstration that knowledge and preparation could dismantle decades of unchecked authority. The ripple effects extended far beyond the Capitol's marble halls, sparking a national conversation about the essence of public service and the safeguards of constitutional governance. Political analysts across the spectrum drew parallels to historic debates, likening Gabbard's methodical takedown to the great oral clashes that shaped the Republic's early days, but with a modern twist of documented precision. Republican senators reached out to align with her cross-aisle appeal, while independents and moderates saw in her a model of nonpartisan accountability. Progressive organizations grappled with the fallout, unable to fully defend Waters without conceding Gabbard's points, leading to internal reflections on ethics and transparency. The hearing inspired a surge in interest for constitutional education, with sales of pocket constitutions spiking and law schools reporting increased inquiries into programs focused on founding principles. Think tanks launched initiatives to promote civic literacy among elected officials, emphasizing that true leadership required not just experience, but a deep understanding of the document that bound the nation's powers. Gabbard's stature transformed overnight, elevating her from a respected but often overlooked senator to a national figure embodying principled politics. Donors and supporters who valued integrity over ideology flocked to her cause, funding efforts to promote similar accountability measures. Her approach, rooted in preparation, respect for the Constitution, and a refusal to stoop to personal attacks, became a blueprint for aspiring leaders, showing that one could challenge the establishment without descending into divisiveness. Media pundits, who had once dismissed her independent streak, now praised her as a bridge builder. Her performance became required viewing in political strategy sessions. The Democratic Party faced a reckoning, with younger members questioning the unchecked tenure of long-serving figures, prompting discussions on term limits and ethics reforms that resonated across party lines. Voters frustrated with Washington's insider games found hope in Gabbard's example, her victory a testament that the system could self-correct when confronted with unyielding truth. Yet the true power of the hearing lay in its educational legacy, a profound lesson woven into the fabric of American discourse. Gabbard, in her closing remarks before the recess, encapsulated it perfectly. Our Constitution isn't just words on parchment. It's a living covenant that demands our vigilance. It teaches us that power must always serve the people, not personal gain, and that accountability isn't optional. It's essential. This message echoed in classrooms, town halls, and online forums, inspiring a new generation to engage with the founding principles not as relics, but as tools for modern governance. The story of Gabbard's stand against Waters served as a cautionary tale. Longevity in office doesn't equate to legitimacy if divorced from ethical moorings. It highlighted the dangers of complacency, urging citizens to demand leaders who prioritize transparency over self-interest, who wield power with humility and restraint. In reflecting on this clash, Americans learned that knowledge of the Constitution empowers the individual against institutional might. That preparation and principle can expose corruption where rhetoric fails. Gabbard's triumph wasn't merely a personal victory, but a reaffirmation of the Republic's core ideals: limited government, equal justice, and the supremacy of law over lineage. It encouraged public servants to place national interest above family fortunes, to view their roles as temporary trusts rather than permanent entitlements. For educators, it became a case study in civic responsibility, prompting curricula that emphasized constitutional literacy as a bulwark against abuse. Ultimately, the hearing reminded everyone that in a democracy, no one is above scrutiny and that true progress stems from leaders like Gabbard, who embodied the integrity to challenge the status quo. As the dust settled, the nation emerged wiser, more vigilant, inspired to uphold the principles that ensure liberty endures for all.